Your avoidant ex has a version of the story they tell themselves and others about why things ended. In that version, they needed space. The relationship wasn't right. The timing was off. You wanted different things. They frame the ending in ways that protect them from confronting their own patterns and the role those patterns played in destroying something that could have worked. But if your avoidant ex finally told the truth, if they dropped all their defenses and admitted what they actually think and feel, the conversation would sound completely different from the sanitized narrative they've been telling. They would acknowledge things they've spent months or years avoiding. They would take responsibility for patterns they've always justified as necessary self-protection. They would admit to feelings they've suppressed and regrets they've buried deep. This truth wouldn't necessarily change anything about whether you should get back together. Some truths are just acknowledgments of what was lost, not invitations to try again. But understanding what your avoidant ex would say if they were finally honest helps you make sense of the ending in ways their defensive narratives never could. It helps you see that the problems weren't about you being too much or not enough. The problems were about their inability to receive what you offered, their incapacity to match your emotional availability, their unwillingness to do the vulnerable work that real relationship requires. Here's what your avoidant ex would tell you if they finally stopped protecting themselves and just told you the truth about everything they've been hiding from you and from themselves for all this time. I was terrified of how much I actually wanted you. If your avoidant ex told the truth, they would admit that their distance wasn't indifference. It was self-protection from the intensity of how much they actually wanted you. They felt things for you they'd never felt before, and it scared them to their core. The depth of their desire for you, for your presence, for your attention, for your love, triggered every defense mechanism they'd spent their life building. They wanted you so much it felt dangerous, like giving you that much power over their emotional state would destroy them if you ever left or hurt them. The truth is, they thought about you constantly, even when they were acting like they barely noticed you. They missed you intensely during the times they withdrew. They craved your touch, your voice, your energy in ways that felt overwhelming and destabilizing to their nervous system. But admitting they wanted you that much felt like handing you a weapon to hurt them. So they protected themselves by acting indifferent, by maintaining distance, by pretending the connection didn't affect them as deeply as it actually did. Every time they pulled away, they were running from the terror of how much they actually wanted to move closer. The wanting was so intense it felt like losing themselves. Subscribe for insights into attachment psychology that help you understand these patterns and protect yourself from relationships that can't meet your needs. The avoidant ex would tell you that their worst fear was being consumed by their need for you, becoming dependent in ways that would make them vulnerable to being abandoned or controlled. They would admit that this fear had nothing to do with who you actually were or how you actually treated them. It was about their own wounds and their inability to trust that wanting someone wouldn't lead to devastating pain. They pushed you away to avoid feeling the full force of how much they wanted you to stay. I knew exactly what I was doing to you, and I did it anyway. If your avoidant ex told the truth, they would admit they weren't oblivious to how their patterns affected you. They saw your hurt when they withdrew. They noticed your anxiety when they were inconsistent. They understood that their emotional unavailability was causing you pain. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway because their need to protect themselves was stronger than their desire to protect you from hurt. This awareness makes their behavior harder to forgive because it means it wasn't innocent ignorance. It was conscious choice to prioritize their comfort over your well-being. The truth is, they could predict how you'd react to their withdrawal because they'd seen it before. They knew that disappearing would make you anxious. They knew that being cold would make you question yourself. They knew that inconsistency would create insecurity. But they did these things anyway because in the moment, managing their own discomfort felt more important than managing your pain. They told themselves they couldn't help it, that this was just how they were, but deep down they knew they were making choices that hurt you, and they made those choices repeatedly. The awareness also means they knew you deserved better treatment than what they were giving you. They could see that you were patient, understanding, willing to work with their patterns. They recognized you were doing emotional labor they weren't reciprocating. They understood you were accommodating their limitations while they weren't even trying to accommodate your needs. They saw all of this clearly and still couldn't make themselves show up differently. Not because they didn't know how, but because the vulnerability of showing up fully felt more threatening than the guilt of hurting you through their absence and distance. I compare everyone to you, and they all fall short. Your avoidant ex would admit they've tried to move on and failed because no one measures up to what they had with you. They've dated other people, pursued new connections, attempted to recreate the feeling they had in your relationship, and nothing comes close. Every new person is measured against you, and every new person is found lacking. Not because those people are inadequate, but because the connection with you was unique and rare in ways the avoidant only fully understands now that it's gone and they can't get it back. The truth is, they miss specific things about you that they can't find elsewhere. They miss how you understood them without them having to explain. They miss how you held space for their patterns without making them feel broken. They miss the specific quality of your patience, your insight, your way of seeing them. They've tried to find these qualities in other people and learned that what you offered was a specific combination that can't be replicated. The new people might be patient but not in your way. They might be understanding but not with your depth. The avoidant is realizing too late that you weren't replaceable. The comparison also reveals they took you for granted. When they had you, they focused on what felt uncomfortable about the relationship rather than what was valuable. They noticed the vulnerability and intimacy that scared them rather than appreciating the connection and understanding you provided. Now that you're gone, now that they can't find what you offered anywhere else, they see clearly what they had and what they destroyed through their patterns. They would tell you that losing you taught them your worth, but that lesson came too late to save what you built together. I sabotaged us because I was scared it was too good to last. If your avoidant ex told the truth, they would admit they destroyed the relationship before it could destroy them. Things were going well, maybe too well, and that terrified them beyond what they could handle. They couldn't trust that something good would last without eventually turning bad. They couldn't believe they deserved the love you were offering or that anyone could love them sustainably once they really knew them. They couldn't imagine a future where you didn't eventually leave or hurt them deeply. So they sabotaged the connection to create the ending on their terms, rather than waiting for the inevitable hurt they were certain was coming. The sabotage was self-protection taken to its most destructive extreme, a preemptive strike against future pain. The truth is, the better things got between you, the more scared they became. Every moment of closeness was shadowed by fear of losing it. Every expression of love triggered anxiety about being hurt when that love was withdrawn or revealed to be conditional. They couldn't enjoy the present because they were constantly anticipating the painful future they believed was inevitable. This anticipatory anxiety became unbearable, and destroying the relationship felt like relief from the constant fear of it being destroyed. They chose certain pain over uncertain happiness because at least with certain pain they had control over when and how it happened. The sabotage looked like withdrawal at the worst times, starting fights over nothing, creating distance when you were getting closer, finding problems that didn't exist, or magnifying minor issues into deal breakers. They would admit now that they were manufacturing reasons to leave because they couldn't handle the vulnerability of staying in something that mattered so much. Every flaw they focused on, every incompatibility they highlighted, was an excuse they created to justify running from something that scared them precisely because it was good and real. They destroyed your relationship to protect themselves from the imagined pain of you destroying it first, and they regret that choice more than they can articulate or process. I wasn't ready for you, but I wish I had been. Your avoidant ex would tell you that the timing really was wrong, but not in the way they originally claimed. It wasn't that you wanted different things or were at different life stages. It was that they weren't emotionally developed enough to receive what you were offering. You were ready for real relationship, and they were still operating from childhood wounds they hadn't begun to heal. You showed up as your full self, and they could only show up as their defended self. The mismatch wasn't about compatibility, it was about readiness, and they weren't ready for you no matter how much they wanted to be. The truth is, they can see now what they couldn't see then. They needed to do years of work on themselves before they could be the partner you deserved. They needed therapy. They needed to examine their attachment patterns. They needed to confront their wounds and develop new ways of relating. But they didn't know that then. They thought their patterns were just who they were. Unchangeable personality traits rather than defensive adaptations that could be healed. By the time they understood they needed to change, you were already gone and moving on without them. The readiness issue also means they recognize they wasted your time. You were prepared to build something real, and they were still too broken to participate in building it. They would apologize for not being honest about their limitations, for letting you invest in someone who couldn't match your investment, for taking from you without being able to give back. They wish they could go back and either be ready for you or be honest that they weren't. But they can't change the past, and the regret of missing their chance with you because they weren't developed enough to take it is something they carry constantly. The version I told everyone else is a lie I needed to believe. If your avoidant ex told the truth, they would admit that the story they told friends and family about why things ended is a sanitized version that protects their ego. They said you wanted different things, that the relationship ran its course, that it was mutual or amicable or just not meant to be. But the real story is that they got scared and ran. They couldn't handle the vulnerability. They chose their patterns over the relationship. They hurt someone who loved them because they couldn't love themselves enough to receive that love. This truth is too shameful to admit publicly, so they constructed a narrative that makes them look less broken. The truth is, they needed people to think the ending made sense for reasons that weren't about their failures. They couldn't tell their parents they left someone perfect for them because intimacy triggered their wounds. They couldn't tell friends they destroyed a good relationship because they were too scared to stay in it. They couldn't admit to anyone, barely even to themselves, that their patterns were the problem. So, they created a story where the ending was inevitable, where nobody was really at fault, where it was just one of those things. This story protected them from judgment and from having to examine their own role in the loss. The lie they told others is the same lie they told themselves for months or years. They convinced themselves that leaving was the right choice, that you weren't compatible, that staying would have been worse. But underneath that lie is the truth they're finally ready to admit. They were compatible. You would have been happy together if they'd been brave enough to stay, and leaving was the biggest mistake they've made. The defensive narrative they constructed falls apart when they're honest with themselves, and what's left is simple regret for choosing fear over love. I think about you more than I'll ever admit. Your avoidant ex would tell you that despite the time that's passed, despite any new relationships they've pursued, despite their attempts to move on and forget, they think about you constantly. You occupy mental space they can't clear no matter how hard they try. They wonder how you're doing, if you're happy, if you found someone who can give you what they couldn't. They replay conversations and moments from your relationship, analyzing what they could have done differently. They imagine alternate versions of your story where they were braver, where they stayed, where they worked through their fears instead of running from them, where they built the life you could have had together. The truth is, you're not just an occasional thought or fleeting memory. You're a presence in their mind they return to daily, sometimes hourly. Something will remind them of you, and they'll spiral into memories and regrets that can last hours. They'll see something you would have liked and want to tell you about it. They'll experience something and wish you were there to experience it with them. This ongoing preoccupation proves they're not over you despite whatever they've said or however much time has passed. They're stuck in the loss in ways they can't escape or resolve because the loss was self-inflicted and therefore harder to accept or make peace with. The constant thinking also includes scenarios where they reach out, where they tell you everything they're feeling, where they ask for another chance to do it right. They compose messages they never send. They plan conversations they never initiate. They imagine what they'd say if they saw you unexpectedly and how you'd respond. But they don't act on these fantasies because they're paralyzed by fear of rejection, by shame about what they did, by uncertainty about whether you'd even want to hear from them after everything. So they stay silent and keep thinking about you, trapped in a private prison of regret and longing they created through their own choices to protect themselves from the very intimacy they now desperately miss. I don't know if I'll ever be capable of what you deserved. If your avoidant ex told the truth, they would admit they're not sure they'll ever be able to offer anyone what you deserved from a partner. They're doing the work now, going to therapy, reading about attachment, trying to heal their patterns and understand where they come from, but they don't know if they can fundamentally change enough to sustain the kind of relationship you wanted and needed. They're scared that even with all the work they might do, even with years of therapy and personal growth, they'll still be too defended, too scared, too damaged to show up fully for someone in the ways that healthy relationship requires. This uncertainty about their own capacity for growth is terrifying because it means they might be destined to repeat these patterns forever with every person they try to love. The truth is, they're confronting limitations they didn't know they had. They thought everyone struggled with intimacy the way they do. They thought their level of emotional unavailability was normal, or at least common enough not to be a serious problem. But losing you showed them what they're missing and what they're unable to provide, even when they want to. They see now that healthy relationships require vulnerability, consistency, emotional availability, and sustained presence that they're not sure they can maintain even if they try their absolute hardest. This recognition of their own limitations is humbling and devastating and makes them question whether they're capable of real partnership. The capacity question also means they're grieving not just losing you, but losing the possibility of the life you could have built together. Even if they do the work and heal significantly, even if they become capable of healthy relationship, you're gone. You've moved on to someone who can meet your needs. They don't get to offer you the healed version of themselves. Whatever growth they achieve will benefit someone else, someone they'll never care about the way they cared about you. This knowledge that their growth comes too late for the person who inspired it, that they'll give their best self to someone else while you got their most broken version, is its own special kind of regret they'll carry forward into whatever comes next in their life.